what I'm going to tell you about is the project that we did with Peel Harvey Biosecurity Group, along with DPIRD and the Serpentine Jarrahdale Food and Farm Alliance. It's a small project, has a budget of around about $25,000, so we have to be fairly inventive in terms of what we did. And it's also an ongoing project, so it doesn't finish until sort of June next year, although the report will be available over the next couple of weeks. Yeah, sure. It's on. Yeah. I'll just tell you how we're organised. So we're going to start off with a quiz. So that's a bit of a warm up for you lot, and then we're going to talk a bit about trying to establish a pest-free environment, COVID to Medfly. Because the pandemic happened during this project, we used analogies to COVID to motivate what we were doing with Medfly, which was quite fortuitous, I suppose. And then I'll talk a bit about some previous work. We did a biosecurity game with students, and that had some interesting results, but actually quite negative results. And that really motivated me to switch to a field experiment and to bring in some ideas from behavioural economics. And then I asked her, having done that, I probably realised I don't actually understand what behavioural economics is. So I asked some questions there about what that is and where it's heading, or what its relevance is. I realise I've got these out of order, but results should come first, then questions about behavioural economics, and then some unresolved questions that arise from this research. So a quick warm-up quiz, and this is what we did with the good people of Jarrahdale and Mundyjohn. So first question.
Can I phone a friend?
You can phone a friend, yeah, go for it. So which of these is a Medfly? Which of these is a Medfly? Yeah, so that's right, that's a Medfly. This one is a Q-fly, recent version in around Netherlands, probably cost DPIRD, I don't know, $1 million to clear up. This is a blowfly. So then next question gets a bit more visceral now. So which of these pictures show Medfly damage? All of them. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the point being that actually Medfly are not too fussy about what they eat. So the organisation we're working with, Peel Harvey Biosecurity Group. So it's a recognised biosecurity group under the Biosecurity and Agricultural Management Act 2007. They have Janelle and her team have a super difficult job managing a complex bioeconomic system with many pests and landholders. And then, you know, they're doing really complicated things like biological control agents to control weeds, rabbits, lots of communication, lots of community engagement. Really fantastic organisation, doing a great deal with very little, really. So I suppose their job is, how do you sort of get landholders to sign up to an informal biosecurity contract where they're taking care, engaging, coordinating. Of course, people have got different objectives, and they work in an environment where they have to encourage rather than particularly, well, they can't really engage in compliance. They can't particularly fine people. You'd like to, but you can't do that. So perhaps you would like to. And then they're within DPIRD, and DPIRD is also resource limited, in terms of what they can do over the Peel Harvey region, which is quite a big region. From north to south, it's probably over 100 kilometres. So landholder strategy. So these examples are not taken from the Peel Harvey. They're taken from my walk around the block in Netherlands every evening, because I've noticed a couple of different strategies in terms of what people do with Medfly. So and these names are completely fictitious, apart from the middle one. So there's Nick, who's is do nothing. You describe him as a pest breeder, really. So he has a mandarin tree, and Nick's comment to me was he turned the fruit to marmalade so the kids didn't notice the maggots. So that was one approach. He's basically doing nothing, and the problem with someone like that is that they spread Medfly far and wide. And then the next one is, well, a sort of pest suppressor. I mean, I basically only grow lemons and limes. They're not particularly good hosts for Medfly, if that's the right word. They don't have many Medfly maggots in them. And I also pick up the fruit, so I'm probably not generating many flies. And then the other one I've noticed is Tina, so the diligent self-protector. Now they're interesting in that they've got one crop apricots. Well, basically, if you don't net apricots, you won't get it because they'll all be eaten by Medfly. They're that bad. But then, so they diligently net up the apricots, and then they've got another crop of pears, which is also highly susceptible and produces rubbish pears, and they just leave them to drop on the ground. So it's a sort of, they're a bit of a problem because they're actually spreading Medfly from one crop and not from another. So how do we go about establishing a pest-free environment? Well, probably the first and the most simple thing is that you just have to get people to clear their fruit. That is the most important thing to do. It's not hard, bending down, setting the kids out to go and bend down, or getting your gardener, if you have a gardener, to do that. And then so that then leaves, well, how do you nudge people to do the right thing? And that's really a big challenge. So I started off looking at this inspired by Steve, really, to start to do some lab experiments with students. And I actually worked with Mark Hurlstone, a psychologist. Also worked with Fiona Dempster on this. And so we ran some experiments in the lab, and the contribution in these experiments was a level of effort into protecting your property, and it was sort of game effort, and it was basically money had to be spent to protect your property, and you ended up with a joint probability of properties being protected from a pest, and this line here is the economic optimal solution, and this dotted line down here is as bad as it can get. So the lowest probability of protection. So if everyone did nothing, then they'd end up on this line down here. And we tried a Jay Showrun approach. Got people to sign pledges or commit to levels of effort. And what we found in this experiment is you got a suboptimal level of effort pretty well whatever you did. And the thing we realised was that the students were actually using information from pledging strategically to actually just get a bit more money from the game. So they were effectively not cooperating, they were playing Nash equilibrium. So players free ride on the basis they have good neighbours. Once good neighbours realise they have bad neighbours, they also become bad neighbours and free ride. And information was used strategically rather than as a way of establishing a social norm. Okay, so that was the student experiments, and it asked a big question: how do you manage a system like this where there's this tendency for free riding? So from the lab to a field experiment and behavioural economics. So this is the region we're operating over. So I'll have to point on here, so I don't think I can use the. So we've got Byford, Mundijong, Jarrahdale, and Serpentine. So those are the treatment towns. And then we've got North Dandalup and Dwellingup, and they are the control towns. So and this is what the region looks like. So we've got the Darling Scarp, the old timber towns of Jarrahdale and Dwellingup, and then we've got the coastal plain towns of Serpentine, Mundijong, and Byford, sort of between the two. It's just edging into the hills a bit. So North Dandalup and Dwellingup, to put it briefly, they were sort of neglected, although if people from those towns looked hard, they could find information. Whereas these towns had some specific information, and also two of them had some training. So we're setting this up as a field experiment, and we're using distance as a way of excluding. And I've got a comment to make about that a bit later. But, I'll leave it for now. So what did we do? The first thing is we did a quick Qualtrics survey of, actually it wasn't that quick, to develop, especially with my skills in Qualtrics. But, so we did a survey of gardeners and landowners across the 6 towns, just to find out what they were doing in terms of growing fruit fly host crops. And yes, they're growing a lot of them, and they're getting quite a lot of damage. They recognise that Medfly, Mediterranean fruit fly, is a pest, and it's up there with birds. I think birds are viewed as possibly a slightly bigger pest. I think in my garden I've got some grapes, but I don't worry about Medfly because the birds always get them before the Medfly do. So yeah, one pest sorting out another, really. Okay, and then the other thing is that we set up a trapping grid of the 91 Medfly traps, and that was implemented by the Peel Harvey Biosecurity group, and that was the first sort of consistent information across those towns about how bad the Medfly problem was and the seasonality of the problem. So from that information, we then designed some training, and so we used the catch phase in flattening the Medfly curve, because Boris Johnson had just said that in the UK in relation to COVID, and we thought that was, I don't think he ever managed to do it, but that was quite topical at the time. The approach to training was that we sort of started off by saying, well, why do you care about Medfly? And it's because produce from your garden is valuable, and it's saving you money and it's making you healthier. And then we went on and said, well, but you probably also care about your neighbours and industry. So we talked about jobs in local horticulture, which have probably been affected by trade restrictions due to Medfly. And then we used some information from the trapping data and said, your town has got a problem. And we showed some of the hotspots that there were in their specific towns. And then we used an approach developed by Isabel in her PhD, based on the theory of plant behaviour, which was what we call the cube strategy, which I'll tell you a bit about it. But it's a really easy thing to do to suppress Medfly. In Mundijong and Jarrahdale, we gave them a free trap as well. So we gave them a bright yellow trap. The next thing we did was to develop a sort of newsletter which we called Flycast, and this was the nudge treatment. So this is where the principles from behavioural economics were coming in, and that went out to 4 of the towns. So we had a sort of sub-treatment. We had Mundijong and Jarrahdale, they got the most intensive treatment, and Byford and Serpentine got specific information, but they didn't get any direct or easy access to training. So the training that emphasised that we're basically all in this together. You can have the best garden in the world, but if your neighbours not picking up their fruit, you're going to have a problem. So we had a little animation about how lazy gardeners who are spending their time drinking rather than picking up fruit have a bad effect on their more diligent neighbours and commercial horticulturalists in the region. And this is just an example of a slide where we try and emphasise why you care about fruit and vegetables from your garden. So it's about being healthier, pesticide-free fruit and veg, and it saves you some money. We then talked about how Medfly, the biology of Medfly, and what they will attack at different times of the year, and we emphasised that you probably need to start early. So the fruit fly season is really sort of starting about now. So you'll see people starting to net off apricots. This is some past trapping data, again showing the seasonality of trapping in Jarrahdale. This was an earlier study by Broughton from Deepwood. Okay, so I just pause a second on the nudge treatment. So this is how we try to persuade people to do a bit more, and this applied across all 4 of the towns. So the first thing is we just gave them some information that they wouldn't otherwise have, which was about the fruit fly numbers, and we also projected forward from the trapping data how bad things were likely to get over the next couple of months. And then we used emojis to highlight towns that had a particular problem. So Byford and Mundijong, the fly numbers were really starting to rise. So we indicated sort of alarm emojis and not happy or not very happy or surprised emojis. And then we indicated that things in Jarrahdale and Serpentine, they should be thinking about it because there were flies appearing, but not in very high numbers across the whole of those towns. But they should start to be picking up their fruit and doing bait spraying. We told them what was on the fruit fly menu, so the range of produce that was likely to be ripe. Realise that people online probably can't see that, but so this middle section has the produce that's ripe, and then we set out the cube strategy. So clear your fruit, use traps to drown flies, homemade or commercial, bait to kill flies with organic insecticide, spray or paint on your trees, exclude flies from fruit, prevent. So that's netting or bagging as a last resort. And then we prompted them about things like trying to help their neighbours. And then we had a Q&A section, which was feedback that Peel Harvey had received. And we also included some other Q&A in there, things that might prompt people to act. So this is the trapping grid, an example of Mundijong and Jarrahdale. So roughly 200 meters in trees. So this is a picture of one of the biotraps in a verge tree, which is not a fruit tree. So that's just in a eucalypt, so we don't just pick up large numbers of flies. The traps work by attracting male Medfly. They think they're going to have a breeding opportunity, but they end up getting a sticky plate that they get stuck to. So many flies were killed in this project. Okay. So the results. So I estimated a negative binomial model for count data. So I controlled for seasonality and allowed for over-dispersion so that the mean didn't have to be equal to the variance. I'm giving the results as incident rate ratios, which is one of the suggestions in the literature. So here are the 6 towns. I'm just giving the results for the treatment effect dummies, which were from January to July 2021, with the traps being checked monthly over 17 months. So that's 91 traps over 17 months. And what happened during this treatment period? So in Byford, the number of flies went up by 44%. Although that was borderline, not significant at the 5% level. And then we had substantial decreases in Serpentine, Jarrahdale, which were the two of the treatment towns. Mundijong had an insignificant increase, and the two control towns, one had pretty well no effect of a treatment, and then Dwelling Up had quite a substantial decrease. So probably got more work to do and more data to gather before we can claim with any confidence that the treatment effect has been significant or not. But there seems to be a bit of evidence of an effect, but yeah, you've got to be cautious with this, I think, for a number of reasons, which I'll discuss in a second. Okay, so we've sort of implemented what we think is a behavioural economics treatment. So we've communicated some information that people didn't previously have, and we conveyed it in the form of a nudge. So other studies that have done this include Ferraro in the US. He had a paper for a very big sample size where people were given information in their water bills to say, how your water use compares with your neighbours, and the results of that study was they got a reduction in water consumption. I mean, the question to me about these studies is how long does that effect last? I don't know. And it seems behavioural economics is a pretty hard way to do economics, because there are so many nudges, so much information that you could put out there. There seems to be lots of, not surprisingly for something that's complex, lots of different angles in the literature. So Isabel started off with the theory of planned behaviour for her PhD, which seemed quite a sensible framework. Comes from psychology. Interestingly, that theory from the 1990s isn't really cited by Thaler. I mean, I probably haven't done an absolutely exhaustive check of that, but I couldn't see any links between those that literature, behavioural economics literature, and the theory of planned behaviour literature. I like the book by Kahneman very much. I think that's a really clear, extremely good book. And I read a commentary that he had about behavioural economics, and he said it came as a big surprise to a lot of psychologists that they were suddenly being called behavioural economists, because they thought they were just psychologists doing applied psychology. So he favoured this terminology, applied behavioural sciences rather than behavioural economics. In that sometimes these things are not really being applied to economics; they're just being applied to changing people's behaviour in a direction that we would like to see. And I always sort of think about Eleanor Ostrom as well, because she was doing something similar. She did lots of work in this area that wasn't called behavioural economics. It was about conditional cooperation and self-organisation, which also seems to be relevant in this context of pest management. So I'm just really sharing my confusion with you there. Okay, so what I think we might have managed to do is sort of develop a pragmatic approach for pest management in a region. We had a clear objective to reduce the number of Medfly that there were, and then reduce what we really wanted to reduce, which is Medfly damage, which of course we can't measure really easily or cheaply. We've tried some you know, relatively innovative ways of encouraging people to do the right thing. We run this as an experiment. If you don't run it as an experiment, you probably can't say that a treatment has an effect, because there's so many other variables that you have to control for. We sort of have a test for success, but I think what we need to do is be prepared to adjust things for this coming fruit fly season, and we've got to, you know, continue in this area, working with a group like the Peel Harvey Biosecurity group to engage in encouragement, because compliance really isn't an option. So questions that arose from this research for me, trapping data. If you look at what's behind trapping data, then you're catching the males, and you're trying to say something about something you don't observe, which is the Medfly population across the landscape. Well, if you think about that, you've got really nasty models. You know, they're spatial, across space, they're across time, and you're trying to model policy effects within that complicated setting. And this problem extends right across, you know, fisheries economics, any area where you're trying to impose a policy on a complex biological system or ecological system, and you've got to measure policy effects. So that was an interesting puzzle to me. I've had a go, but whether I've used the best approach, I'm not sure. Another thing that sort of emerged, Peel Harvey Biosecurity Group, almost by its, by the way the organisation is set up, can't really exclude people from information. So it can't say, right, we're going to tell this group something, but we're not going to tell this group. And you can't really have passwords on web pages. So it's quite hard to make information treatments exclusive. We did it in this study by having a distance between the treatment towns and the control towns. But then I thought, well, hold on. In all these studies where people are getting water bills, does no one ever talk to each other? You know, does anyone ever say to, you know, their neighbours or people in another suburb, I got a weird water bill. Did you get one of those weird water bills? Oh no, your water bill's different from mine. You know, what's yours then? You know, people talk about things. So I don't quite, you know, there's a bit of an issue there that if information treatments can't be exclusive, then they're probably slightly weakened. The other thing that worried me is engagement. So these days we depend on Qualtrics and we depend on web pages a lot. I did the demographics. Some of these towns are, you know, they're sort of tree change towns, and you know, I think some people there might think that, you know, the web is probably a dangerous place to go. So you don't necessarily get as much engagement with these things. They might not actually be paying attention to many of these messages. So that's something that we have to explore in the next iteration. And we've got one more season. So these are the people involved in the project and the funder. So the funding came from the Australian Plant Biosecurity Science Foundation. Project was implemented by Peel Harvey, so they did all the hard work, and there was really good input from Serpentine Jarrahdale. Food and Farm Alliance, and DPIRD in the form of Isabel Aravallo Vigne. I'll finish there with a picture of me.
It's wonderful to see you guys. Okay, thanks, Ben. Very interesting presentation. You were talking about talking to neighbors. I have been wanting to check with my neighbor if they were getting similar water bills. Every time I see him, I forget. not easy. So, okay, the floor is open to questions. Yeah, and then Chumbo.
So I think I'm interested in the adoption of new practices by farmers, and it's sort of a whole separate literature that's emerged there. Studying behaviour change for 50, 60 years, so I was doing behavioural economics before it was called behavioural economics.
Yeah.
But it seems
there's a lot that goes on.
Yeah. But it seems different, strikingly different in some respects, in that typically in the work on behaviour change by farmers and new practices, you get large treatment effects. You get large effects, large changes in behaviour over time. Going from 0 adoption to 80% adoption is not uncommon, or 50%. Whereas when I look at the consequences of the nudges in the nudge literature, they seem to be happy if they get 5%, and often less than that. And you've sort of got the same, haven't you? You've got, who knows what it is, because it's very difficult to tell. But whatever it is, it's not a really clear-cut, decisive behaviour change.
There might be something there.
There might be, but there also might not, you know.
Well, that's right.
So it strikes me that the big difference there is that in agriculture, where those cases where they've got very large adoption rates or behaviour change, there's a compelling private benefit. You know, you're adopting a new wheat variety, it's going to yield more, there's no complications, you just adopt it and you'll make more money in the bank. Whereas these sort of the cases where they're using nudges are much more subtle and complex, and often they're trying to change behaviour when there isn't a compelling private benefit.
Yeah.
And maybe that's always going to be the case. You know, like maybe it's never going to be, for that reason, you're never going to get more than a few good-hearted people who buy the message that I should be good to my neighbours. And that, you know, this 5% is all you can ever aim for. So it's not a question, it's just sort of an observation.
Well, if these results are to be believed, then Jarrahdale had an 81% reduction. So that was...
Yeah, but I think you've got to look at the whole package of those results, haven't you? Unless you did things differently in Jarrahdale than in Biosecurity.
Yeah, that's very true. And yeah, no, I completely agree with you. You know, so this is for often really the problem households, I think, or the problem landholders are the ones who have a very small stake. And so we, in the training sessions, we talked to, there were some people who were really diligent and, you know, took this problem really seriously, and they had a big stake. They had, you know, 10 susceptible fruit trees. But then they said, you know, they had many neighbours where trees were just abandoned, and so it's trying to get those people to sort of start paying attention. And I think the only way of managing these problems is that these initiatives are started and then continued, and probably you have to have campaigns on a regular basis to say, you know, pay attention to this, otherwise the compliance will just fall off. I think it comes down, you know, if you're a farmer, you might have $200,000 to $1 million at stake for a machinery investment or some other innovation in a new variety, or even with the biggest sort of garden or land holding, it's probably no more than $10,000, and people are busy. They've got, you know, the opportunity cost of time is quite important.
on the data though. At what level are these data measured? So for the suburbs.
Yeah. So it's traps, so it's on the trapping grid.
Trapping station. So
Yeah.
so you could have had variables other than just the control. How come you didn't go crazy with it?
Yeah. I didn't give all the results, but I've got rainfall, maximum temperature, minimum temperature.
And the characteristics of the owner.
That is characteristics of the region.
There's no hospital involved. This is location-based data. There's no attachment to hospital.
So the measurement is happening in that.
Not at
In private,
at the
yeah.
closest spot. This is the location, and then
Yeah.
see how you have a neighborhood, and then is that the same?
Yeah.
Or on birch trees.
On the trees. Okay.
Oh no, you're not allowed to have a question if you're not. Go for it.
I don't understand what the data is. It says treatment effect relative to 4 treatments. I've got all 6 towns. So what's
Yeah. So what I did is I put, just as a check, I put in the dummy variable with the treatments in the control tags as well.
Before and after?
but I've got some before data?
You got some before data, and then you got after data.
Is it not exploiting any differences regarding not the figure? You're just saying here's a block of before data across all 6 zones, and now in comes treatment. I actually did a joint test, but none of that's going to be significant.
Yeah, I did that. I think the treatment was borderline. But I thought I'd just check whether there was any effect on the control tags because of the nature of the treatment. So the only one that does what you expect is, well, of the 2 control tags, North Dandelion does what you expect, in that the treatment had no effect there. It's making no difference. Whereas dwelling up actually behaved, actually behaved as if it was a treatment. You know, you do like a treatment to behave.
That just suggests that each question have loads of noise in here, and that got one treatment producing odd, and then the other ones are going in the direction as well.
Yeah, I'm controlling for quite a lot though, in terms of different temperatures.
Question online, but before that, Chumbo has been waiting.
Because this is not set up as a difference. You just compare each town before and after. So the results for those 2 control towns, they are pretty much baseline. So that reflects whatever you have control over. This is the net effect of anything unobserved. This is the baseline. Everything else needs to be interpreted against this, relative to this. So that's your baseline. The other thing is that I want to go back to Dave's question on adoption of ag technology in your study. This is not capturing the effect of nudge on behavior, because you're not capturing data on behavior, you're capturing the data on the results of behavior.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lack of biological knowledge behind this. Why?
No, they don't. They're reluctant flies. Surprisingly. Yeah, it's quite
Okay. I mean, if you want to have a clear identification of the effect on behavior,
I completely disagree with you, John.
No.
Because what you want to do, if you have a treatment that's, I mean, we were right, that's right. What you want to do, if you have a treatment that is meant to reduce flies, well, a measure of success that you reduce flies. To me, asking people what they've done, they're more they're likely to not actually tell you, or you pick up an equally noisy message, I think.
Yes, that's not what I was trying to suggest. It's not that you capture the data. This is the observation the flies capture in the traps. But then any other way that you can, not by asking people to respond, monitor observation of whatever the strategy you have prescribed for them, backs, using backs, any information on backs applied. That's direct reflection of the behavioral change. Regardless of the results, I don't care about the result, but that's the intermediate tool you want to change behavior, right?
Yeah, so that's before COVID came along, we were going to do a follow-up survey on whether the behaviour change had made any difference, but we ran into some problems there. So we were planning to do that, we just didn't do it.
And it's so easy to buy those products out of region as well. So we go to Perth and get their supplies. So you're talking to local stock feeders about changes in that equipment. It would be impossible to tell.
That's Steve. For acre adoption issues are on-farm issues. I think he's talking about a comment by Dave.
Well, I think, no, well, yes, but the observation that I'm making is that the difference in behavioural response probably, on hypothesizing, probably reflects the difference in the private benefits. I think that's true, but that is a valid comparison.
Okay. Any other questions? So measurement-wise, in terms of the quality of the measurement of the count, how confident are you?
Definitely confident.
Yeah. So does it matter what time of day you count, for example? Is it possible? Okay, so they are measured in the same way in all suburbs? Yeah.
So these traps are used for biosecurity compliance. Very, very reliable.
So they know how many. Yeah.
So, did you record that your information dissemination? We sent out a lot of information in March, and then you saw a reduction of flies within the next month.
Yeah.
Time or whether repeated information, would you pick up anything?
You probably could. In this initial analysis, I just used a dummy variable for the treatment effect. You might be picking up temperatures, so that should be controlling for seasonality.
I just wondered, very biological, but eggs, larvae development, what that time frame is, and then the time from
So it's about 28-day life cycle.
So whether you can pick up in the months more clearly the information.
You might be able to, it's probably a bit too noisy to do that.
Yeah.
I just have a comment about the time frame, because if I think about changing behaviour around my home, like netting the fig tree or something like that, we might talk about it, agree that we should net the fig tree, and then that year, who's netting the fig tree? And then no, our neighbour is netting it, we should net. So it's kind of, it might even be like a few years actually before people really adopt behaviour.
Yeah, well, I'd like to run the project for a few more years, so I don't have that much. But yeah, I think it has it for 20 years at a time.
Okay. Any more questions?
You can observe the application of netting and bagging from the streets. Like what you have observed the tracking data with few locations. Can you sample a few streets?
Yes.
Make observations, just random observations at a different point in time.
Yeah, we can.
it's very hard to see anything from the streets.
It's all in the backyard or you can
Yeah,
see
like
anything.
some suburbs you can see, oh yeah, they've got an orange tree, oh yeah, they've got some kind of net on a fruit tree, but on a whole, it's really hard to discern what types of fruit trees they have, how many they've got.
Having
Very-
fruit on the ground.
Yeah, it's very limited to what you can actually see.
So there was it Byford number 3, trap 3 that was always there.
Oh yeah,
It was the mystery one because
yeah, you can't see into anyone's backyard, but it's
and it always catches 300 flies. Everyone else is capturing 1 or 2. So that was so I did ask Lee to have a look, but it's pretty hard to do it systematic.
to be fair, and yeah.
We don't have raw bench here like that.
Have they ever had information campaigns where they go on TV so that everyone knows, like on channel 7 or 9, that people are likely to watch to tell them what to do, or school programs like for water safety? What is it?
Yeah, we got we had a postcard that went around. We contacted schools. So we,
No, I don't mean just a project,
yeah,
but in general, the local council or the government. Has this been an important problem for them to do something?
it's probably not up there. It's a bit of a hidden problem, I think. When we try to put a lot of effort into communication, including where was this?
That was at the market, so
Yeah,
we did weekends for at the market.
And how damaging economically? How much food is being lost?
Yeah, for some people you're losing. If you don't pay attention, you probably lose all your fix.
Yeah.
So if you put any value on your fix, you lose the whole lot. Same with apricots, nectarines, lemons and limes.
Okay.
How much information is going to the website? Or how much is specifically targeted in terms of the jobs and stuff?
Yeah. So the specific stuff was the bypass. Then there was lots of generic.
So how's the bypass done? That's
work
The go to the work.
was it being disseminated out within the towns to go and look at this particularly, or was it just passed out and anybody in any of the regions could possibly start on this?
Yeah, because of non-exclusivity.
Could you check any people with it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I think it was about 130 people went to the one page. We also made generic information for deep.
Okay. Thank you. You can stop there. Online, does anyone have questions? I don't think anyone has. Okay, so we will conclude. Thank you then.